Inside was Kendrick Johnson, and he was stuck inside the rolled up mat with his head toward the floor, and he had been in this position for 21 hours.
And today we're talking about the mysterious death of Kendrick Johnson, which is an insane case, honestly. And there's been a huge update in the case recently. So he lived in Valdosta, Georgia, which is about 15 miles away from the Florida border. And his friends and family called him KJ. He was a super sweet and quiet kid who was well liked at school and adored by his parents, Kenneth and Jacqueline, who went by Jackie, and his two older siblings. And Kendrick was a star athlete. He was super, super athletic and talented. No matter what sport he played, he was one of the best on the team. So in 2013, KJ was 17 years old, and he had gone back to school after winter break the second week of January. So that Thursday, January 10th, he had plans to meet a few friends after school to go to the freshman basketball game. But he never showed up that day. And his mom expected him to come home after the game. And when he was late, she started to worry, of course, because KJ never missed his curfew or snuck out. He was the kind of kid who always called his parents to let them know if he would be, late or if something came up. But by 9:30, she was really starting to panic when she hadn't heard from him. At 12:30 a.m., she called the police to report him missing. The dispatcher dismissed her, saying that he was, probably just out with some fast-tailed girl.
And that's a quote from the dispatcher.
The police didn't call back until 4 that morning, and KJ still wasn't home at that point. So the next morning at 8:30, Jackie went back to the school and she met with the counselor and found out that KJ had missed a few of his last classes the day before. So now she was really worried because it was not like him to skip class. So around 11 a.m., she's sitting in the counselor's office discussing flyers that they're going to post up when the counselor got a call, and the phone volume was turned up loud enough for Jackie to hear it. And the caller said that someone found a body in the gym. About an hour earlier, around 10 that morning, a group of students were in the old gym waiting for a life sports class to start. And they kept these huge wrestling mats and cheerleading mats rolled up in the corner of the old gym. They're usually lying down, but over winter break, someone had propped them up and had added several more as well. When class started, Coach Philip Pipelo called the students together and handed out surveys for them to complete. After one of the female students had finished her survey, she noticed something at the top of one of the mats. So she climbed the bleachers and walked across to get a better look. And she saw a pair of white socks sticking out. And that's when she realized that there was a person stuck inside the mat. So the coach raced over to the mats to see what was going on. He rounded up a few other students so that they could collectively push over this mat because that's how heavy these things are. So as they finally got it to tip over, a shoe and some books fell to the floor. And once it was down, Coach Phillip tried to pull the person out head first from the other side, but it was too late. There was blood and vomit inside the mat, and they all talked about the smell of death instantly filling the room. He immediately told the students to go over to the new gym and wait, and he called 911.
Police officers and EMTs were dispatched to the school at 10:30 a.m., and they arrived at 10:35, and by 11 o'clock, they had the entire school on lockdown. The investigation was led by Lowndes County Sheriff Chris Pine, and he requested backup from the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, or the GBI, in order to help process the scene. Inside was Kendrick Johnson, and he was stuck inside the rolled up mat with his head toward the floor and one arm stretched above his head, almost like he was reaching down for something. And he had been in this position for 21 hours, which is crazy. Investigators interviewed every student who had been in the old gym the day before and that morning. One of the things that they found out was that the school actually charged students in order to use lockers. So several kids used the rolled up mats in order to store their gym clothes and shoes.
That's wild. I've never heard of a school charging for lockers. That's so weird.
Investigators also looked at the school's security footage in order to piece together Kendrick's movements from the day before. They saw him going to his morning classes there early in the morning around 8:30 or so. He also went into the gym at 1:09 p.m. And there's footage of him jogging off to the right toward the mats at 1:27 p.m. But there was no useful footage of the mats. Other students entered the gym just 3 minutes after him as well. And initially, investigators didn't find any evidence of foul play, and the same night Kendrick's body was found, Sheriff Chris Pine announced that his death was an accident. According to law enforcement, they said that KJ had climbed the bleachers to get to the top of the mats. He saw his shoes inside, tried to reach in, and then he accidentally fell into the mat, getting stuck and eventually suffocating. The autopsy that was performed by GBI medical examiner Mary Ann Gaffney Craft listed the cause of death as positional asphyxia, And this happens when a person is trapped upside down in one position for an extended period of time. It's a rare diagnosis, though. That's usually only considered after all other possibilities are ruled out, because literally there was only 37 cases of positional asphyxia from 1992 all the way up until when the term was first introduced in 2018. But the official investigation conducted by law enforcement did not satisfy Kendrick's parents at all. They were not convinced that he had died accidentally like they had said. And they still had a ton of questions about the investigation itself. One of the important notes that seemed to be left out of the law enforcement's investigation was the fact that when EMTs first arrived and saw Kendrick's body, they noticed that he had bruising on the right side of the jaw. But investigators claimed that there were no signs of blunt force trauma on Johnson's face or body. And the autopsy said there was no significant injuries either to note. Also, there were doubts that KJ could even fit inside of this rolled up mat at all. He's 5'10" and the mats were 6'2". Some say the mats are a little bit taller than that. But when they're rolled up, the diameter was only 14.25 inches. And KJ's shoulder width was 19 inches.
So there are several problems with how this crime scene was handled from the beginning. According to Georgia state law, the medical examiner needs to be notified immediately when a dead body is found. But the Lowndes County coroner, Bill Watson, wasn't called to the scene for 6 hours. But by the time he got there, rigor and livor mortis had set in. So as a reminder, rigor mortis causes the muscles to stiffen, and livor mortis causes areas of the body where blood has settled to turn a purplish red color. So the EMT report lists the gym as a crime scene, and Bill Watson said that he definitely wouldn't have called it an accident based on what he saw that day. Yet the sheriff announced that there was no foul play later that night. They were very quick to make that call. And just like in so many cases we cover, not everyone in the gym that day wore protective shoe coverings to prevent contaminating the evidence. And some of the evidence wasn't even taken into police custody. So just really sloppy work. A few yards away from KJ's body, there was a hoodie, and there's also one orange and black tennis shoe. And the shoe, guys, has red spots on it that look like they could be blood. So they look at this and they decide that it's probably not blood, and they never got it tested to make sure. Also, there were a bunch of streaks of blood down a white wall in the gym, which was only about 50 feet from the mats. A female member of the color guard told investigators that she was hit in the nose at practice the night before. So they took a swab of the blood and tested it against KJ's, and once they determined that it wasn't his, they didn't do anything else. They just said it was unrelated to the case. They also thought that the blood had been there longer than a day. So they apparently doubted that it belonged to this female student. Then there was a black and white tennis shoe that had been under KJ's head inside the mat, and likely one of the shoes that he was possibly reaching for. This shoe was sitting sideways in a pool of blood, but there was no blood on the shoe itself. So maybe the shoe could have been moved from when the mat was tipped over and placed in the pool of blood, but no one knows for sure.
So obviously, once KJ's family found out about his death, they wanted to see the body right away, but they were actually denied. Kenneth insisted on seeing his son's body before the autopsy. The authorities, however, only agreed after Kenneth called a press conference and talked to reporters. So later that day, they escorted him into a room with KJ's body. He also noted that KJ's cheeks were covered in blood, his eyes and lips were swollen, and his skin was discolored. There was also scratches on his hands, and his fingernails had been clipped. And Kenneth knew KJ always kept them long and thought it was very odd that someone had already clipped them. So mind you, this is before autopsy is performed. His parents weren't allowed to see their son's body again until after the initial autopsy. But when they finally did, they were absolutely horrified at what they saw. His face was so swollen that it barely looked human, and it was all bruised and almost looked like it had been smashed in. His head was even misshapen.
How traumatizing to see your child that way. Like, no parent should have to go through this. Jackie and Kenneth didn't believe that KJ's death was an accident, but if they wanted any hope of getting investigators to listen, they needed more public support. So it became vital for them to get the word out. They took pictures of his face and they posted them everywhere, which was quite controversial. They shared his most graphic picture on social media and printed it on large posters and put them next to his school and labeled them before and after. But at the time, here's the thing. They didn't disclose that this photo was taken after the autopsy, not before. And when people found out that these were after the autopsy was done, it did anger a lot of people. because racism is still a huge problem in the South, especially in Georgia. And KJ's parents believe that his death was not taken seriously by the sheriff's department because he was black. And Sheriff Chris Prine and his entire team of investigators at this time were all white. So the more KJ's parents learned about the crime scene and the autopsy and also the police response, the more convinced they were that there was some type of cover-up going on, and they wanted answers. And this second autopsy was paid for by the family's attorney's office and private donations from fundraising from a rally they did in May of 2013, which was hosted by Al Sharpton.
Which definitely helped.
Definitely. He'd helped a lot with this case. They also hired a private pathologist, Dr. William Anderson, to perform the autopsy, and what he found was shocking. Because when he opened KJ's body, he discovered that his organs were missing, including his brain, his heart, and his lungs. And not only that, guys, his body was stuffed with newspapers. His family describes literal crunched up pieces of ads, JCPenney ads, grocery store ads in his body. So if they haven't been through enough trauma, add that to it. GBI spokesperson Sherry Lang said that his organs were inside his body when he was transported from the GBI to Harrington Funeral Home. They said that the funeral home checked the body and verified that the organs were there.
So in February 2014, Kendrick's parents filed a lawsuit against Harrington Funeral Home for mishandling their son's body and deliberately withholding information about his condition. However, this lawsuit was dropped in 2019 and they've refiled it since. But literally, I mean, they already were cleared of any wrongdoing, but seems like something went wrong in this funeral home. So for the second autopsy, Dr. Anderson couldn't test any of his organs, which would really limit what he was able to test. He conducted the autopsy as best as he could and still had some significant findings, which he presented in a 4-page report. In his report, he found bruising on the right side of KJ's neck that was caused by blunt force trauma. He said the bruising was consistent with inflicted injury and ruled that his death wasn't an accident. The second autopsy was also reviewed by coroner Bill Watson, and he said that it was very vague, Dr. Anderson's report, and it lacked specifics, even though it was a full 4 pages long. The review determined that the first autopsy was actually more credible, so the second one was dismissed. Jackie and Kenneth then requested a coroner's inquest in order to reclassify Kendrick's cause of death as homicide. But in order to do this, they needed to present this evidence at a public hearing. So now let's talk about the surveillance video a little bit more, because this is where there's a ton of contention.
So then that same month, a judge ordered authorities to release all the surveillance video related to the case, which included over 1,900 hours of footage from 36 different cameras. Once it was released publicly, there was a lot of controversy around the footage, of course, because many people believe that it has been altered.
But there is no footage at all of him leaving the gym. And there actually was a camera that faced the mats, but it was out of focus, like we noted in that video clip, and the top of the mats weren't even in view. But one of the kind of more weird things about the footage is that there's at least an hour missing from around the time KJ would have been in the gym, or some other people would have been in the gym with him. Next, we're going to get into potential suspects in this case. If this wasn't an accidental death, then who may have done this to KJ?
So in 2014, Jackie and Kenneth filed a wrongful death suit against the county school board, the school superintendent, and the principal, claiming that KJ was killed by one or more students on school property during the school day. Also, this is interesting, but KJ's body was discovered by the superintendent's daughter, which the Johnsons claimed was by design. They also filed another suit against the school board for failing to protect KJ from bullying, harassment, and discrimination, particularly from a white student named Brian Bell. So Brian wasn't specifically named in the court documents, but his mother, Karen Bell, told the media that he had been in a fight with Kendrick. But she said that it was no big deal and that they made up right away. The fight supposedly happened because KJ had slept with Brian's girlfriend and Brian found out. And apparently they had gotten in a big fight about it on this bus trip to a football game, which was about 14 months before KJ died. And friends confirmed that there was a big fight on the bus and that tensions had been high between them. So KJ's parents believe that Brian killed KJ with help from his older brother, Brandon Bell, who also went to the school, and that the whole thing could have been covered up by their father, Rick Bell, who is an FBI agent, of course, and they believe that he may have been involved in KJ's case. But police believe that the brothers had strong alibis. Brian and Brandon weren't on any surveillance video in or around the gym when KJ was there. But it's possible, like we said, that this footage could have been altered and maybe the brothers were removed from it. Brandon's alibi was that he was on a bus going to a wrestling tournament in Macon. But one of the big things here is that when KJ was in the gym, Brian was in class, and this was verified by a teacher and other students in the class. And he was also seen on surveillance video on the other side of the building. An FBI video analysis of this surveillance footage officially cleared Brian of any involvement in 2017. And then in 2016, a federal review of the case was completed. The Department of Justice said that there was not sufficient evidence to support federal criminal charges, and Kendrick's death was ruled an accident. On August 6, 2017, the family's attorney, Shaveen King, filed a statement from a new witness in the case. This guy, Ryan Domek Hernandez, claims that Brandon admitted to pretty much everything the Johnson family believed about him and his brother Brian. Brandon told Ryan that there was a fight in the gym between KJ, Brian, Ryan Hall, and himself. Brian and KJ started to physically fight, and according to Brandon, his brother was on steroids and hit KJ in the neck with a 45-pound weight or dumbbell during a roid rage that killed him.
And during this time, a petition to reopen the case received over 1.7 million signatures. And in the description, several students are named and blamed for Kendrick's death, including Brian and Brandon and the girl KJ supposedly hooked up with, Taylor Aiken. The petition was shared on social media by Benjamin Crump and even Kim Kardashian West. However, this is interesting too, is that Taylor actually denies sleeping with KJ, and she said that she didn't start dating Brian until 3 months after KJ's death.
So then most recently, March 9th, 2021, Sheriff Polk's request for federal records were finally approved, and the case was officially reopened. So this has been huge. He said many times that he would reopen the case if he could get those records, and he stood by his word. He said that this is being treated like a brand new case, and his team received 17 different boxes of evidence, which includes tens of thousands of emails, texts, and interviews with nearly 100 people and multiple hard drives. And just in March of 2021, KJ's parents received evidence that may actually solve the case. They were contacted by a person who had secretly recorded a family member confessing to KJ's murder. Marcus Coleman, a spokesperson for the family, actually said that this recording is likely a Caucasian young male, and he emphasized the young age. The speaker also sounded very afraid and spoke through tears as he said twice that he knows he's going to get caught. Right now, investigators are working on finding out who sold them this recording, and obviously they're trying to figure out who is in the recording as well. KJ's family strongly believes that they have been up against a crooked, evil system, and they won't stop fighting until they can get justice for KJ. And they say that people can help by spreading KJ's story, donating to the Kendrick Johnson Foundation Fund, which is on GoFundMe. It definitely is. I don't know how I feel at the end of the day. I don't feel comfortable saying either way.
Well, we can't because you don't know either way.
Right. But it seems like until we know more information, which hopefully we do get this year, that you can't really say either way. Because this recording could be huge. We just don't know.
It could be.
We just don't know.
We don't
at this
know.
point.